people lots of people like the idea of starting businesses, but not many people do because it's a risky business and it's quite challenging. For me, it's a bit like when people are leaving the military, I always ask them, what do you deal with better, frustration or anxiety? And if people can deal with frustration, they can normally exist in bigger companies where there's more bureaucracy and there's more kind of political natured stuff. But if you can deal with frustration, you can do that. If you don't mind a bit of anxiety, you can be in a smaller business or start your own business, but that's a lot more uncertain. And a lot of people then can orientate themselves as to, right, actually, I want a bit of a challenge and I don't mind putting everything on the line because I would hate to be in that kind of corporate environment. There's no right or wrong. You can be in either and be successful, but it depends on where you are. And a lot of the stuff that I was lucky enough when we were moving into PGI to get exposed through a very senior intelligence officer and a brilliant professor into using psychometrics to assess people and to assess. It's a very, not always completely understood tool, but certainly the Hogan assessments that we've been using for, over 12 years now, gives you another dimension of which you can look at the business. So you've got your kind of, your sales figures and your kind of leading indicators of what's going to happen, your lagging indicators of your finance, but then the bit that is the hardest to get right is people. And the more you can get that kind of 3D approach to it and look at the people, the better. And that's quite challenging to do if you don't have a systematic way of assessing them. And we found that using that, so if you think 40% is timing, the other 60%, probably 30% people, 30% plan. But I've never seen people good enough to do it with the wrong plan, and I've never seen a plan good enough to do it with the wrong people.
Having just gone through the Hogan's assessment with you, which was freakishly accurate and was a little bit scary, doing the feedback session, which really but fascinating as well. Helped you as much as you think you understand yourself. It did ask a few questions of me, which is quite interesting.
Yeah,
but I don't know if you can actually talk a little bit more about your interest in that and where you're going with that.
Yeah, as I said, it was two guys that introduced me to it and world leading experts on it. Hogan's has been around about 30 years as a psychometric personality profile was really the nature of what it was, which is all based on a 5-factor model from Carl Jung many years ago. But it's had about 12 million people go through it, so it's got a huge body of scientific data behind it and the validation process. But a lot of psychometrics, and there are numerous other good ones, but the reasons I liked Hogan's is because it's the only one that really pulls out what we call derailing behaviours. So there's kind of 3 elements to it, what the psychologists would call the bright side, the dark side, and the inside. And what that gives you is kind of your bright side tendencies tend to turn up on, interviews or the best version of yourself and some of the different characteristics of decision-making, leadership styles, learning approach. The derailing behaviours tend to be, as we would say, kind of when you're a bit cold, wet and tired, who turns up then and what people like under pressure. And it's really understanding those behaviours and being able to mitigate them. And they're normally pretty situational. It's either through, tiredness and fatigue, bring it out of people. Some people are very different then. Stress will amplify a lot of derailing behaviours. Hunger for some people as well is one that's often misunderstood. If people aren't getting their nutrition right, that will affect their mood swings and that will affect their business performance. And like you said, everyone thinks they know who they are, but it's really how your behaviours are understood by your peers and that really gives the best indicator of performance.
Organisations recruiting staff based on...
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, there's a number of different psychometrics that are used for that. The one that we use is more for it will give you indications of kind of leadership potential, and also what's really interesting is when you put a whole team together and you see, right, the team's got really creative tendencies or they've got more detail orientation, and then you can build kind of bespoke training programs to develop them. But if I looked at all of the businesses I've run, they've all been people businesses. So I've always had that fascination, and what the consultancy business in RSG, what we do now, is going in and working with business owners or CEOs and what's their strategic goal they're trying to achieve, break that down, check the commerciality of it, but then also look at the team that's got to deliver it. That's often the area that can get overlooked. And if one of the big things, interestingly, I've done it with some senior military recently, and they were saying, this should be brought in more in some of the leadership assessments that senior leaders go through. It's used quite extensively. It's very big in the States. I've been lucky enough to meet Bob Hogan and understand some of the stuff they've done with it. But it's just another way of getting a metric on something that's quite hard to understand. But I'm obviously not a classically trained psychologist, but I've been around some amazing. Professor Adrian Furner, who I work with, is one of the world leaders in this area, and he's worked very closely with UK government in different areas. But it's interesting to see the nuances of different people and different environments.
Obviously, without giving too much away, because you've done most of our team at Frontier now. Was there a common thread running through most of it? I know we haven't had a team feedback session yet.
No, we'll do
out
that.
Of interest.
Yeah, no. So it's smaller businesses that it matters more. So when you're the smaller the team and the tighter the team, the more each individual. And when you add a different personality type, that can add additional skills and stuff like that. So when we're dealing with smaller teams, it's really important to get that kind of chemistry right between the team. And I've always said, and anyone who's spent any time around you, like, you've got a very unique culture here, and it's a really strong one. And what you've built, people will think is kind of, it's just Pete and Doug's. I know the amount of hard work and the actual preparation and insight that happens. Even Pete, in fairness. But I think the cultures are made by, there's a lot of studies on cultures and numerous books, but the trend that I tend to see is culture has become are defined by the acceptable behaviours. And we all know, when you first leave training in the Corps, you think you've got a green lead, you think you're absolute, and then you find out very quickly that you have a huge amount to learn. And that's a whole nother process of getting that. And there's a load of cultural norms that you then have to adopt that kind of stay with you for the rest of your life in some ways. And, you get into businesses and they want cultural change. If the behaviours aren't supporting that, then it's really difficult to do. So
massively difficult to change a culture within an organisation, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just look at sporting teams and the various cultures. We all like to go and watch our rugby and stuff like that. And the differences between, obviously, you get different players coming through, but the cultures created by different coaches and different environments are hugely different. And that, I think, is that's in something that is coming together to do a very defined strategic aim of winning a game of rugby, which is not saying that's easy, it's very complex. But when you look at some of the stats that come out the last World Cup, where I think South Africa won 3 games by 1 point. So you're talking about the finest margins, and that cultural difference is where it is. And I think
I listened to something really interesting, weirdly, this morning about that, and the South Africa winning. It was on a recent podcast with Joe Marler, and on the High Performance, I'm going to be talking about loads of other podcasts, but the bit that was fascinating was that in England dressing room, going up to that World Cup final in 2019, they were just talking about winning and what it meant to win, blah, blah, blah. He said, but the South African dressing room, they were talking about what legacy they'd be leaving. And like Sir Khaleesi was going, I want to start looking at how I can impact gender-based violence in South Africa, helping in the underprivileged. And he said that there was a whole focus was not about winning for us. It was like, what can we do? What impact can we have on the rest of the country? And he said every team, like Joe was talking about Harlequins, when they had a different purpose and they had that sort of togetherness that was bigger than the actual goal. They're the ones that always end up winning. Yeah. Like Northampton last season, I don't just talk about rugby, but it was like Courtney Lawes' last season. A couple of things said they weren't the best team, but if you look at it, they had a reason to win. They wanted to win for Courtney being his last season at Northampton. So these things happen in history all the time, and it just shows how much bigger it is than just having the best players or the most talented team. Yeah,
I could definitely think of times where you find out what the culture's like when it gets hard. Yeah, that's the bit. For me, was when the most difficult times is when you see what you've really got, both as an individual and as the people that you've got around you, and that's where culture plays a big part of it. And it's not that you can't have a business or even parts of the military that everyone's a top bloke, but the average is there, and there is a cohesion that brings them together. Yeah. It's a very intangible thing, but it's certainly when it's wrong, it makes a massive difference. And if you look at some highly competitive environments where toxic behaviours start to be accepted, that ultimately leads to the downfall. If the only goal is success and winning at all costs and not looking at some of the other areas, it's not probably the most sustainable of cultures. We saw that in investment banking, in areas like that, where it was highly remunerated, highly charged environments doesn't always lead to a sustainable outcome. If you look at some of the studies that have been done in different places, and why their cultures have endured, there's normally a very kind of communal feel for it and an ability to kind of understand the vision, but also get to the incremental parts of making that. Long-term success is based on kind of small day-to-day behaviours and builds into weekly stuff and all that type of thing. There's no kind of panacea of, we just do that and everything goes okay.
That's got to get more difficult the larger the business becomes, surely. Yeah. So just thinking back to, I thought our little core, down at Tiverton, we had a lot of core team, the culture was brilliant, and as things got bigger and bigger, and it just got diluted a bit between all these different organisations. And I guess with us, because we're quite small, it's been pretty useful to us. We've got people we can rely on, and we've had some different. We've got to have different personalities in the team, but it's still really fully ingrained in what this culture is about and what we feel like we've built.
We have one guiding principle, don't we? The New Zealand rugby. We've always
the no dickheads policy.
Yeah, that's well documented.
We always followed that. We had to take the sign down.
We have the odd dickhead, obviously, but like just like a business, any.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even that. It's just a clash.
We're all dickheads at some point, don't we? But
but
as long as you pull yourself around, someone can tell you, and you go, I can see that.
If somebody's putting it in a different way to you, or it doesn't have the same value. If somebody's having the same values as you. As the business owners then, or the people running the business,
there's got to be an alignment.
It's not going to work really.
You need that.
We've all suffered from making them. You just you don't trust if you don't trust the people you work with.
Yeah, and it's often hard when you don't know what someone's going to be like until there's that pressure or difficulty, and then you start to see those different traits come out. But no, I think that study of All Blacks. I mean, Daniel Coyle's book, Culture Code, is a brilliant insight into going and looking at different cultures and what are the key things that make them enduring or elite. And you get, it's a much bandied around word now, psychological safety, which is basically just being able to say what you want to say, but without any kind of consequence of it. And that once you get that level of trust, you can then start to give real honest feedback to each other without it becoming personal. Well, you see that it's quite hard in the business world where people are always slightly guarded. They're not really telling what it is, and that doesn't help. In those cultures that are enduring, it's your obligation to give that direct feedback because everyone wants to improve. Yeah. And if you look at, it's easier to see that because the results are more tangible and instant in, if you look at British cycling or some of those teams that add that incremental performance increases, there's increases of marginal gains. It's just small little incremental stuff, but the culture's got to be there to have that ruthless kind of look at itself and go, no, we're not doing this as well as we could, and then go forward. And that takes quite a lot of confidence, and you get the right people in that. And I know some of the areas in that book were really interesting to look at. I go, okay, that's really good. How can you build that into what you're doing on a day-to-day basis? But it's, a lot of it just comes down to those simple daily behaviours about what you accept and what's not acceptable.